All right, let's take a look at inside the box. You notice that the bottom isn't flat, all these little raised areas in there. And do you also notice that there's a hole in it, right where my finger is wiggling? That hole is the water overflow hole. In other words, when I put that screen in here, that screen is going to sit on these raised areas and keep it up off of the bottom. That's where the soil is going to be. So the soil is going to be about 3 inches up from the bottom. Below that is going to be about a 1-inch airspace, and then below that is going to be the water chamber. It will hold 3 gallons of water. You see these corners and these upper, the two upper corners are kind of like boxed. And remember this? In other words, your soil is going to lay on here, except here it's going to go down in the water. And you can imagine what that's for. Your soil then is going to be the wick. And so your potting mix is literally going to wick the water up to the top of the EarthBox, and that's how it gets watered from the bottom up. Which means a rain is not going to hurt it a bit. It's never going to have too much water for the plant. The plants will always draw, the soil will always draw up what they need. And by the way, when you buy your material to put inside here, be sure you get something that's called a soil mix, or a potting mix, not a potting soil. Potting soil will have like sand in it or clay or something like that, and those don't wick as well. So you want to make sure that it's a potting mix. And the potting mix that I'm going to use is what we sell here at the nursery. This is our own mixture. Oh yes, these are weighted, aren't they? I hope you got that on tape. Ideally, you would want a 2 cubic foot bag. This is 1.8 cubic feet. It is enough, but it would be better if it were just a little bit more, as you'll see in just a little bit. Now, before I actually put the soil in, I'm going to open up the wheels, the casters, and put them in the bottom of the box. Not very hard. Okay, now we've got our movable garden. The screen is inside here, and the first time that I used this, I put tomato plants in here, 2 tomato plants. So they were sitting up here at the top, growing down. Remember, your soil is here, your water's here, this is the air space. Remember, we talked about roots needing air. So they're guaranteed to get their air even though they're in the middle of the box. At the end of the growing season, I took my tomato plants out, and I thought, I remember that screen that was full of holes. I wonder how long I'm going to be sitting there with the tweezers picking all of those roots out from under that. What they did is they came down here, stopped, went flat. All I did is just peeled them right off the top. It was not a problem at all. And I also learned something else, that it's not even necessary to do that, and I'll explain that in a little bit. So we put our tray, or our soil tray, back inside here. Oh, one other thing I wanted to show you. See this hole? Okay, that hole is going to match the tube that we're going to be putting in here. And this is the water fill tube. So when you water this, you're always going to put your water down through this tube. That is going to go into that space below the tray or the screen until it overflows. And when it overflows, it's going to come out of that hole that I showed you earlier. So you always fill it until it runs out. That's how you know when you have enough water in it. Just fill it till it runs out. It holds 3 gallons of water. That does add quite a bit of weight to it, but it's also a lot of water. When you have 2 very big plants in here, you'll be surprised. You'll be adding water every day, and you'll be surprised how much you keep pouring in there. When you first plant it, it'll use almost no water. Remember those little roots smaller than a hair that you put those little plants in, like when I planted the spinach this morning? They take very little water, but as they grow and those leaves get bigger, they're going to transpire. transpires like people when we sweat. Roots, of course, absorb the water, moves out through the plant. About 95 to 98% of the water that goes into a plant goes right back out through the leaves. It's simply moving from the bottom to the top to bring up the dissolved nutrients that the water is carrying into the plant. That last 3 or 4 or 5% is what it uses for other processes inside the plant. But it has to move that water up and out. Okay? So, we're now ready to open that bag, and we're going to fill this mostly full, but we're going to stop about 3 inches down from the top. So we're going to come down, we're going to put only that much soil in, and then I'll explain why we're doing that. You want to make sure that your soil is moist. If the soil is not moist, then you're going to need to add water as you are putting it in. So you're going to put in a layer of soil, use a sprinkling can, moisten it, but this is moist, so I'm not going to have to do that today. So we're going to take this big bag. We'll stop at about that point. Another thing I like to do at this point is to come back to these 2 corners where those squares were missing in that screen that went all the way down into the water, and just pack that down extra tight. That'll firm up that wick so that the soil mix can bring the water up to where the plants are going to be. At this point, my soil line is right here. And now I'm going to open this package. And as I said before, this contains 2 things, one of which is lime or dolomite, and the other one is the fertilizer. We want the lime to be powdered. This is like a dust. Sometimes people like to do it with their own materials, and they use the granulated or the pelletized lime, and that doesn't work as well. Don't miss this step if you're going to grow peppers and tomatoes. Peppers and tomatoes are known for getting a blister on the side of the vegetable, on the side of the fruit. It's called blossom end rot, and it comes from a lack of calcium in the plant. And if there's not enough calcium in the soil, the plants can't bring it up, and then they end up with that big black spot, flat, shiny, black, awful looking thing on the bottom of your first tomato. You just can't wait. You go out there to pick that thing, and here's this thing on it. So you hopefully cut it in half, and maybe you can eat the other half, and you can't. It's in there too. So you throw the whole thing. In fact, you may throw over the first dozen of your tomatoes away. And the best way to prevent that is to make sure that you have some lime in your soil and available to the plants, and that you keep uniform wetness in your soil. Even with lime in your soil, if you let it completely dry out and then water it heavy, there's going to be a lack of uptake in calcium for a period of time there, and you're still going to get that blossom end rot. There are some sprays that you can get that you spray on the tomato or on the pepper plant that are absorbed by the leaves that will help solve that problem. But the tomatoes with that spot on it are never going to get better. You're just going to have to throw those away and wait on the next ones to come. So take your lime, and the nice thing about this is that it's all pre-measured. This happens to be 1 cup, but it's all pre-measured for you. And just pour it out, spread it out somewhat evenly. Don't worry too much about it. You may want to spread it out a little bit. And when you're done, it should look something like this. Sort of like an Oreo cookie that got run over by a car. A little bit. All right, now you just pour the rest of your soil mix in there. And if I say potting soil, stop me and make me say potting mix. It should be mix. It won't wick right if you use potting soil. Mix.